Hello, I'm Eugene, and I'm one of the pastors here. For those of us who grew up in the church, we were told how important it is to share our faith with others. We were told that doing evangelism is one of the marks of being a fruitful and mature follower of Jesus. But if we're being honest, many of us feel really awkward about actually doing it and have a hard time knowing how, especially in our culture today that seems so hostile to Christianity. When I was just entering high school, my mother forced me to go to a youth camp that was focused on missions and evangelism. Their idea was to send us out into the park in pairs to approach random strangers who were just minding their own business and talk to them about Jesus. It was among the most uncomfortable experiences of my entire life, and at the time almost made me wish I wasn't a Christian. I'm sure that wasn't the effect they were going for, but even as a young teenager, I remember thinking there's got to be a better way. And over the last few weeks, we've been in a series called Bless, Leading with Love. We believe God has created and called each of us to be a blessing to those around us. We want to share the good news of God's love in ways that can actually be recognized as good news, not as being pushy or presumptuous or driven by an agenda. We want to share God's love in ways that actually feel like love. Using the word bless as a guide, we've talked about how we need to begin with prayer. We need to shed our own agendas and align ourselves with God's heart for the people in our lives. Then we need to listen with care. We need to earnestly seek to understand our neighbors as people, not targets, with a posture of humility and an eagerness to learn about their cares and concerns. Next, we were encouraged to eat together, even though some of us may not have needed much encouragement in that area. But the challenge was to see the breaking of bread together as a missional act, to break down walls, to share our tables with strangers and practice radical hospitality as an act of love. And today we want to talk about what it means to serve with love. I mean, that sounds great, doesn't it? Sign me up. I mean, of course I want to serve with love. I like helping out in a soup kitchen once in a while or going on a missions trip to build houses for poor people. It makes me feel great. Serving others in love sounds like being a really nice person. But hold on. If we're understanding what it means to serve with love in light of how Jesus did it, then we'll see that it's about much more than just being nice. It's something totally different and countercultural. It'll get people's attention. It'll be transformative. It will most likely be difficult and costly or even risky. It might require a complete reordering of our lives and priorities. It might change the things we do, and most especially, change why we do them. Still interested? Christians are supposed to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We're called to stand out and make a difference in the world. Unfortunately, Christians are too often known to stand out for all the wrong reasons. According to a Barna research study, when non-Christians were asked to describe Christians, the words most frequently used were judgmental, hypocritical, close-minded, insensitive, too critical, or too political. Sheesh. Jesus said, everyone will know us by our love. And Paul tells us, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient and kind, etc. Something is clearly wrong. Christianity has a serious image problem. Many of you feel this problem acutely in your workplaces and classrooms and in your neighborhoods. We don't want to be known as those kind of Christians. So we learn to fly under the radar. Just be nice and blend in. Or maybe we should be extra hardworking so that people might respect our work ethic or success, and maybe also respect what we have to say about other things too. But that rarely works. Could it be because our lives aren't different enough to make people curious about why we're different? Part of the problem is we live in a culture that encourages us to be consumers at every turn. Modern life has provided us with endless options for entertainment and amusement at our fingertips. We have more choices for everything from coffee to sports channels than ever before. Living in the age of social media makes us all feel like we're missing out on all the fun and amazing things everyone else seems to be doing and the incredible food everyone else seems to be eating. More excitement, more money, more indulgence. We buy into the cultural narrative that life is about getting what we want, that it's about me, myself, and I. It's about climbing the ladder of self-fulfillment and success. We want to have the best stuff, eat the best food, and go to the best places, or even attend the best church. Yes, we even bring our "what's in it for me" mentality to church. The irony is that all this self-centeredness only leaves us with more loneliness. The pursuit of self-fulfillment only leads to an even deeper spiritual hunger and emptiness. What if the way to a fulfilling life isn't self-fulfillment, but self-denial? What if the purpose and end goal of life isn't worldly success, but godly service? When we look at the life of Jesus, we see something very different from the way of the world. Jesus often called himself the Son of Man, which is just a way of saying, look everyone, I'm human. Jesus is God coming to earth as one of us to show us what true life looks like. He came to live the perfect human life, to show us the way to true life. And how did he do it? What is this way? Well, Jesus tells us that whoever wants to become great must become a servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus' purpose of life was not to be served, but to serve. Let that sink in for just a moment. What is your purpose? If we say we follow Jesus, we need to wrestle with the fact that Jesus' way looks very different from the way we and the rest of the world tend to operate. While we pursue success and security, Jesus came to the earth and chose the life of a poor homeless man. If we say we follow Jesus, we need to take a good, honest look at our own ambitions and the way we live our lives and see if they actually look like Jesus. Instead of living just for himself, he lived for others in love. What do you live for? Do you live to serve or be served? Jesus' way surely is not easy. In fact, it might go against everything we know. But I want to remind us that Jesus' way isn't the wide gate that leads many to destruction, but it's the narrow road that leads to life, the one that few find. The passage that was just read for us a little while ago is a familiar one. You may have heard it repeatedly, but I invite us to hear it again, because in it Jesus demonstrates the full extent of his life of service and love. Jesus is having his last supper with his disciples right before he's arrested in order to be tortured and crucified. And John begins with this ominous sentence. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. And then he says this, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. That last sentence is John's way of saying Jesus' whole life has always been consistent. He's not acting out of character here. He's simply doing what he has always done his entire life. Having loved his own, he loved them to the very end. He came not to be served, but to serve. John tells us that Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. The original Greek literally says that Jesus knew the Father had given all things into his hands. In other words, Jesus is in full control. He knows where he came from and where he's going. He knows who he is and that he is one with the infinite creator of the universe. All things have been given into his hands. He has unlimited cosmic power. In other words, he can do anything he wants. So what does Jesus do with all of that infinite cosmic power? He removes his outer clothing, picks up a towel and a basin of water. He kneels and washes dirty feet. If you've ever walked around in sandals in a dusty, hot climate, you'd know that after a whole day, your feet can get pretty dirty and smelly. Well, this was first century Palestine. There are no leash laws, no special camel-only lanes in the streets. They and all other animals would roam free and just take care of their business wherever they pleased. And they didn't have street cleaners, so you can imagine how gross this would be. And in this culture, before reclining to eat, somebody would have to perform the unenviable task of washing all of those nasty feet. It was a task that was usually reserved for only the lowest ranking servant of the house. And because there weren't any servants around, I can imagine the disciples starting to look around nervously. Who's going to do it? Talk about an awkward moment. But then Jesus, their master, their rabbi, stands up, removes his outer clothing, and reaches for the towel. And the disciples are stunned, shocked. This is the last thing anyone expected. And it's important to note that this is no small task either. Jesus washed all their feet. First of all, that's a lot of feet, 24 in all. Second, these are the feet that have walked with him for the past 3 years as his closest friends. And these are also the feet that would run away and desert him in just a matter of hours. John tells us Jesus already knew what Judas had in mind to do. Imagine what it was like for Jesus to kneel before his betrayer, to touch his feet, get in between the toes, to wipe them clean. He washes the feet of Peter, the denier, Judas, the betrayer, of his disciples who would all desert him. Why? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Jesus explains, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." What does he mean by this? The Greek word used here means pattern. It's a master copy to be imitated, a blueprint to be followed. It's not just an illustration, it's an instruction manual. He's saying, do things this way. Do as I have done for you in humility and service and love. If the disciples had been paying attention, this shouldn't have surprised them at all. This is merely the culmination of everything he's taught and demonstrated up to this point. Right? Having loved his own, he loved them to the very end. The Son of Man came to not to be served, but to serve. Turn the other cheek. If someone wants your shirt, give him your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go a mile, go 2 instead. This has been Jesus' pattern his whole life, and the path that would ultimately lead him all the way to the cross. Jesus' example, his pattern, is one of sacrificial love and service. Now, to the world, this might look like weakness. But in this, Jesus is demonstrating what true power looks like. He chose humility over pride, self-sacrifice over self-centeredness. He had power. All things were given into his hands, and yet he chose the vulnerability of love and service. And Jesus wants us to discover this same power. He's saying, I'm showing you the way. Here's an example, a pattern. Now it's your turn. Following Christ means following his example. It means being a servant. Jesus said, very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. The question is, if Christ, our teacher, our master, our Lord, washed feet, what are we going to do? Are we greater than Jesus? Jesus is inviting us to follow his example of service and sacrifice for others. God washed our feet. He went to the dirtiest, foulest parts of who we are, and he washed them clean with his sacrificial love. If Jesus will even wash the feet of Judas, his betrayer, whose feet are we called to wash? Someone we disagree with? Someone who hurt us? Someone we hate? If we only serve those who deserve it, or only the people we like, that might be serving, but it's not serving like Jesus. When our classmates and coworkers look at us, do they see lives that are different enough that they actually see Jesus? Perhaps the real reason we don't share our faith with others is that deep down we fear they probably won't listen or care. And why would they? Unless they see something different about our lives. Serving with love isn't just an extracurricular activity for Christians. Jesus is inviting us to reorient our entire lives around service. He came not to be served, but to serve. So what does that mean for us? God didn't put you here so you can serve yourself or to follow the worldly pattern of success. God put you here so that he can bless the world through you. Like Jesus, we're here not to be served, but to serve. Now, this doesn't mean we can't have nice things or go on a vacation. Remember, we're called to serve in love, not out of guilt or obligation. Indeed, even if we give all we possess to the poor and sacrifice our very bodies, but do not have love, we gain nothing. Rather, we're invited into a different way of orienting our lives, not around ourselves, but around love for others. And I'm not saying it's always fun, but When I'm motivated by love, even difficult things can seem light and easy. Giving generously can feel utterly natural. When we serve in love, it doesn't have to feel like a drag. In fact, it can feel like joy. And it's this kind of winsome love and service that has the power to change the world. I want to tell you something honest and real. The world doesn't care about what we think or believe. But when our church puts on a benefit concert to raise funds to support a social worker in town to help the vulnerable, it pays attention. When we offer our building to the town so at-risk youth can have a place to go to school, it earns trust. When we deliver bread and offer relationship and care to our neighbors, it opens doors. When we extend kindness and hospitality to international students who are far from their homes, it breaks down barriers. When we serve in love, people see Jesus in us. Do you want to know what the church can really do to get the world's attention? It's not newer, bigger, better, more attractive programs or amassing more popularity and power. It's doing what the church has always been called to do from the very beginning. Feed the hungry. Welcome strangers. Clothe the naked, care for the sick, and visit the prisoner. It's looking after orphans and widows. It's helping the poor and standing up for the oppressed and marginalized. It's being like Jesus, sacrificial and generous. It's serving with love. So how do we do this? How do we serve in love? Well, first, begin with prayer. Ask God for a heart of love for others. Talk to God about your own self-centeredness and see if there's any way that you need to repent and die to your own selfishness. Second, listen. Don't just go out there and do stuff for people without respecting them as people and without paying attention enough to understand their real needs. Third, eat together, which is just another way of saying grow in relationship with people. Serve in the context of mutual trust and friendship as a natural way of honoring and loving them. Remember, we're called to serve in love, not with strings attached. And really, the only way to do that is out of a genuine life of loving service. Not just on special occasions or when it benefits us in some way, but out of a whole life dedicated to the service of others. You see, the only way for serving others in love to not be weird is if you do it all the time, when it's just naturally who you are and what you do. In high school, I had a friend I would often go out to lunch with, and we would meet in the school lobby, and most days he would just be like, hey, let's go. But on some days, he would have this big, cheesy grin on his face and be extra glad to see me. And of course, I immediately know what's going on and say, okay, what do you want? What would you think if someone who never really pays much attention to you, or somebody who doesn't even know you very well, suddenly goes out of their way to be extra kind or do something for you? You would think they're either trying to get something from you or manipulate you in some way. Likewise, serving in love is about much more than just a good deed thrown in here and there to get a desired result. It's about being the real thing, being genuinely loving people. It's not a strategy or a means to an end. It's about authentically witnessing to the life of Jesus in you. Why else would anyone care about what you had to say? how can you humble yourself and become a foot-washing servant to your spouse or your family or your coworkers or your neighbors or your friends? Maybe it means serving your spouse or your family by committing yourself to be present rather than being distracted by busyness or by your phone. Sometimes the greatest way of serving others is simply to give them the gift of your presence. Remember, if true greatness in God's kingdom is measured by service and love, not success or competition, then it might give us the freedom to help and serve others at work or at school, possibly even at the risk of our own personal advancement. Now, to the world, that might seem foolish. But remember, Christians play by a different set of rules. We are supposed to stand out and be different. Is there a way that you can go out of your way, even if it's costly, to help, to bless a friend or a neighbor this week? Perhaps it's an intentional act of kindness. It may require paying attention and listening enough to understand what would truly be received as love. If you are a churchgoer and consider yourself a Christian, but you are not serving others in some way with your time and your talents and your resources, it's possible that you're not really following Christ at all. When you go to work, do you come to serve or be served? How about when you go to class or interact with your neighbors or when you come to church? Do you come to serve or be served? Jesus has given us an example, a pattern to follow. He's shown us the way of sacrificial service and love. And Jesus says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Who is the Holy Spirit prompting you to serve this week? Where, when, and how will you serve them? Would you begin with prayer now about that? Pray for that person. Pray for yourself that you would be able to love that person and be a blessing to them. I invite you to take a few moments for that right now.